Be honest, how many people looked down at their shoes when Lori told that story about having two left shoes on? I know I certainly did the check to see if I had the right ones on. Great to be here at iMedia. It's been a little while since I've been to one of these events, but so nice to see so many familiar faces and meet a bunch of new ones. So I need a clicker. So I'm Steve Patrizzi. I joined Pinterest about 3.5 months ago, so early February. And as you may have noticed there, my title, Head of Partner Marketing. And I just want to spend a second speaking that a bit because the most important word in that title is partner. And we're pretty different from a lot of other companies in that you have a lot of media companies who have teams of editors or content creators who are producing a lot of the content for their properties. In other cases, you have platforms that are social platforms where a lot of users are creating the content. And we're different than both of those two scenarios. We really think about two constituents. So we think about partners. When we think about partners, we're thinking of all of you, businesses, the agencies that work with those businesses, the marketing platforms that support them, bloggers. And we think about pinners. It's what we call our users. Our content primarily comes from partners. So we're not creating any of our own content, and the pinners aren't creating the content. The content is being provided by businesses who either contribute that content themselves into the platform, or they're making it very available for pinners to take that content and collect it and curate it and share it. And as more of that content goes into the system, more and more pinners engage with that content. They invite more pinners into the system. That audience grows larger, and more often than not, they are returning back to those partners in some shape or form, or delivering new users to those partners. And so we very much think about what we're doing here, as Jennifer mentioned, almost like a co-op, where we are building this platform together. We think of all of you literally as our partners. Sometimes partners in this context, in the marketing context, is referred or used to label, we're doing some interesting advertising programs together, maybe we're doing some unique advertising programs, and therefore it's a partnership. In this case, we think about it as we're really working together to build this experience. And we want to build an amazing digital experience for users. And when you think about companies that have built amazing digital experiences, the one thing they all have in common is that they deliver a magic moment to their users. So you think about Facebook, and Facebook's magic moment, for many people, was the first time you ever put your real name online. And then you were magically connected to someone who you probably thought you would never be connected to again. I remember when that happened to me. I was suddenly connected with a bunch of people from high school who I never thought I would see or connected again, and now I was. And now they're part of my life, and I'm part of theirs. LinkedIn's magic moment. You find that connection who introduces you to a job opportunity that is the perfect job for you. It's a magical moment. There's a company we're all pretty familiar with, right? Google. You type in a question into this little white box, and you magically get these answers that are incredibly accurate, right? So it could be, what's the weather going to be like this week in Chicago? It could be, what's going on with playoffs here? How do the Blackhawks do? It could be, where can I find an electronics store in the very rare scenario where someone might board a plane in San Francisco and fly to Chicago for a speaking opportunity and leave their iPhone charger at home. And they need to go find a place that can sell them a charger. It's amazing. It returns these answers not in minutes or in seconds, but in milliseconds. And it works for billions and billions and billions of queries. But there are a bunch of queries that don't really have factual answers to them. Things that are a bit more subjective. They're really unique to us. Things like, what should my living room look like? How can I make it a little cozier? Right? Or, what should my wedding be like? These are all very personal things. There's no factual answer to this. What should I make for dinner tonight? What are some clothes that, I could probably use some help from Clinton here. What are some clothes that might make me look or at least feel a little more cool? These are all questions that don't have factual answers. These are questions that you really have to discover the answer for. Okay? And when you think about the real world, Jennifer was talking about how people park in the parking lots and they may discover things. The real world is largely oriented around discovery. We walk into these spaces that have been curated by people. They've been specifically designed to help people discover things. You might walk into a supermarket with the intention of buying a dozen eggs, but suddenly you find all these other ingredients or products that you might like, and you might help you make a better dinner than you had planned on it. Or you walk into the beauty counter and you discover new colors of nail polish, or you walk into a department store maybe to get a welcome mat, and you wander by the electronics department, and now you're realizing, hey, there's some interesting gadgets that might be good for me to get. So the real world is really organized around discovery, and it happens every day. But the online world isn't really organized in that same way. We would argue that discovery online is largely an unsolved issue, and it's one that we're hoping we can solve in partnership with you. Now, what was interesting is that when the founders started Pinterest, they didn't realize that's what they were working on. They didn't realize they were working on trying to solve online discovery. They were working on trying to solve a very different problem, something that existed in the offline world but wasn't really well served in the online world, and that was around collecting. So the founders, like many of us, did a lot of collecting as kids. They collected bugs, or they collected albums, or they collected baseball cards, and they liked to organize these items in really unique ways. And the way in which we organize these things we collect says a lot about us. It says a lot about our interests. You could organize your baseball cards in a myriad of different ways, right? You could organize them by player. You can organize them by team. You could organize them by the year. And that's a very personal decision, but it adds a lot of context to each of those items that are in those collections. It has a very different meaning now. It's associated with different objects in those collections. And so they realized, wow, there's tons of great stuff on the web, but there's no way to really organize them at an atomic level. I can bookmark pages, but that's not really building a collection and allowing me to organize things in ways that make sense. And so they went about building a tool that would allow people to do that. And you guys are all probably very familiar with this. I see a watch on J.Crew that I like, and I decide I want to add that to a collection. I've got the pin it dialog that comes up. In this case, I pin it into a collection I've created called Gifts for Guy Friends, and it goes into this collection now with a bunch of other items that I think might be good for guys. And so this watch now has a connection with all these other objects. And of course, I zoom in on that pin, and there's all kinds of things I can learn about that object. What are the other things that are in that collection? What are some of the things that were pinned from that source? So in this case, from J.Crew, what are some other items that I might find interesting? Whoops, can we go back one there? Where else was that pinned also pinned to? So that's also very revealing. Where do other people see this object fitting into their collections? What are the things they think it sits well with? And of course, that pin always takes me back to where I originally found it, right? So I always have a way back to that original source in case I want to buy it at some point. And so they built this technology to allow people to start building these collections, and they started to see it take off. People were replicating that offline experience online now. They were building their collections. And the first aha moment, this is when the first aha moment for the founders really occurred. So there's been a lot of attention on the grid design and the visual nature of Pinterest. What they realized was happening, though, is that people were organizing the web's content into interests. That's really what was happening here. And so just as we use technology, we use Google to go out and index the web's content, now people were organizing the web's content. It's a very complementary experience. And if you think about kind of the origins of the web back in the mid to late 90s, Yahoo was using people to index the web's content. Right? They were using their own employees. I don't know if you guys remember this, but you would submit your site to Yahoo, and it would go through this review process, and they would decide whether it belonged in the directory or not. And obviously, that didn't scale. They were only leveraging the people inside their company. Google saw a different opportunity. Let's use technology to go out and index the web's pages. And that scaled really well, but we didn't quite capture that subjectivity. We didn't quite capture that personal element. And so we're back to using people, but instead of using people inside of a company, we're empowering all of the web's population to organize and index the web's content around interests. And in doing so, make it a bit more discoverable. So that was the first big aha moment the founders had, is that, wow, people are indexing the web's content around interests at massive scale. The second insight, aha moment, was that a very different type of social network was forming. So we have social networks that are great at connecting people with their friends. We have social networks that are great at connecting people with other professionals. Pinterest was a social network that was connecting people with things, with objects. And specifically, or typically, things they love, objects they love. And they were taking these objects and they were organizing them into these collections. They were giving them some names. These collections, by default, were publicly available. And so others were discovering these collections, and what one person might call my recipes, someone else thinks of as fried fantasies, and what someone thinks of as my clothing, someone else thinks of as summer fashion. And they were building these connections through shared interests. And in doing so, realizing that there was some overlap in the objects that they were interested in, but then there were also some other things that they hadn't quite thought about they were now discovering by virtue of seeing someone else's collection that was very similar to something they were interested in. So a very different type of social network was forming here, and it was all about people connecting with things. So it was the second big aha moment. Now, we think of this mapping of people and things and interests as an interest graph. And this interest graph is being built by the web's population. It's being built in partnership with you. And it has pretty interesting impacts for companies and their products. So interesting example, so this jar of Vaseline, okay, gets pinned from the Unilever site, and it gets pinned into a board around glycerin-free products. So someone who has allergies to glycerin products, here are some things they can use. Then it gets repinned into a board about hair and makeup, where the person is describing it as something that's really great for keeping your skin nice and smooth. Then it gets pinned into a board about to use or not to use. And one of the things that's mentioned here is that, hey, it's great for when you have a baby in the house. Nothing takes care of diaper rash as well as Vaseline. And then it gets pinned into a board about health and fitness because it's really great if you're a runner and you run in the cold. It helps with chapped lips. And this continues on and on. This one jar gets organized into a number of different collections, everything from things you should pack when you go away to college to summer fun to products I love. The distribution now has happened at a pretty massive scale, and it's happened all very organically. So Unilever, in this case, hasn't really had to do anything, but it's kind of a marketer's dream when your product is positioned in a number of different use cases, all that are very relevant to the users who are actually creating those collections. And so that's kind of the interest graph at work. One of my favorite examples here is it's a board about weddings I love. And you see a lot of things you'd expect in this board, right? Wedding dresses and what the table should look like and where we should go for the honeymoon. But then you see this tub of Ben & Jerry's ice cream in this board. And it turns out you can actually get custom-made flavors and custom-made tubs of ice cream. In this case, they called it Will You Marry Me? Kind of a nice gift for the guests at your wedding or something you might serve. So I don't know about you guys, like I'm married and I've organized a wedding. I love ice cream, but I never would have put those two things together. I love Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I never would have put those two together. So that's an interesting discovery experience here, where suddenly I'm aware of an opportunity that I wasn't aware of before, right? Something unexpected. So our mission is to help people discover things they love. So we want that example to happen over and over and over again. We also want them to go out and actually do these things, right? So close the laptop, turn off the iPad, go out and do this stuff, right? If you're creating a board about running, go out and run, right? Get out and do this. If you're putting together boards about ice cream, take the kids out and go get ice cream. If you are looking at recipes, collecting recipes, Lori looks like has a great collection there. Make the stuff, right? Actually cook it, do it. So we really want to put a lot of emphasis on those two items, help people discover things they love and help them do those things. And again, that's what we think is a great opportunity to partner with many of you on delivering this type of experience. Now, there are a few things we know we have to get right to realize that mission. And the first is that inspiration happens anywhere and everywhere. So we talked a bit earlier around mobile applications, and last summer we made some pretty big investments in mobile apps on Android and iOS. Ben, the CEO and co-founder of Pinterest, he made a bet with a bunch of the engineers around when mobile usage would eclipse web usage on Pinterest, and he lost that bet an hour after the apps were pushed to the App Store. So we're seeing an incredible amount of activity and usage on mobile platforms, but it's not just the technology. When we think of anywhere and everywhere, it's not just the technology. I think the opportunity really sits within the stores themselves, and I'll talk a bit in a second around some things we're seeing where businesses are actually changing the way they organize merchandise in their stores based on some of the activity they're seeing in the way people collect and organize products. I think whatever your passion, there's a place for it on Pinterest. If we really want to deliver this mission of discovery and action, we have to make sure that we're serving all of the interests. And so there are a number of interests where we've managed to build up very nice ecosystems around home decor and fashion and beauty. But there are a bunch of others that we feel are ripe opportunities to work with partners to develop these interest scenarios. And there's a whole list of them here. Many of them are at the early stages of development. And so we think that just represents an amazing opportunity for partners to work with us on how do we build and address and serve the needs of a more diverse set of folks with different interests. And then inspiration is more meaningful when it's actionable. So again, the second part of that mission, how do we help people actually do these things? Lori mentioned that a couple weeks ago, we introduced some additional functionality to the pins, and I'll talk about this in a second, but the idea is we want to make these pins more useful and more actionable. We want to make it easier for people to actually go and do things with these pins. Okay, rather than just collect them, how can I actually take this and take an action on the pin? So we call these rich pins, and I'll talk about that in a second. So those are the three things we have to get right, and that if you're interested in partnering with us on this mission, we hope you keep those in mind as you're thinking about how you might approach Pinterest. But I want to get a little more specific in how you can start to put this interest graph to work. And most of this is information that our partners have told us. So we're still a pretty small company. We have 130 employees. And so we're learning a ton on our own, but we're also learning even more from our partners. So a lot of what I'm about to share is information that our partners have told us. This is what we're finding works. And the first thing they tell us is that while the typical intuitive approach to social media is you build a presence on this platform, right? Set up your profiles and start from there. They're saying that it actually works in reverse on Pinterest, that the first thing you should start doing is inspire people to pin your content. And that starts with something very easy, the pin it button. You implement the pin it button. It's a couple lines of code. But it makes it super easy for people to take your content and put it into the graph, put it in the interest graph, organize it around these interests, make it more discoverable. And a number of our partners say, hey, yes, it makes sense that we have it in the typical places where we have some of our other sharing buttons, but it serves a very different purpose, right? Those other sharing buttons, they're very good at putting an object into a stream. Often those streams are oriented around things I just did. And they're telling us that when they're using the pin it button, it's a bit more about putting it in a place that's a little more aspirational, things I will do or things I want to do. And there's a bit more of an evergreen and permanent aspect to that, right? It goes into a board. It doesn't slip down a stream. It actually sits in a board. And there's some permanence around that, which has some advantages, and it represents some things to think through as well, because you have to figure out, how do I deal with a pin that will live forever in someone's board, right? Can I continually support that? A number of partners, they'll take a little bit of liberty in orienting that button to ways that make sense for their design, right? So we see it here in Chanel, we see it on Tiffany. They've created buttons that make sense for their design and layout. But then we see others get a little more creative. And so in this case, they've created an overlay button that sits on this photo. They really want to draw attention to getting people to pin this photo. In some cases, like in all recipes, it's actually the only button they're putting on their objects. Again, because they want this object categorized and organized around interests. For those of you who are optimizing for Bing, hopefully you've become aware of this, that Bing has started implementing the pin and button into image search, and it pulls it right from your source. So it will always link back to your site, not back to the image search in Bing. And we see some companies realizing, wow, the curation opportunity here is pretty impressive. I remember one of the first conversations I had with a partner, and I asked, why was he investing time in supporting Pinterest? And he said, well, it has allowed our content to be broken down at an atomic level. And what's fascinating is watching how these atoms of content are then reconstituted in these boards. What are people pairing them up with? And so a number of our partners have realized, wow, that's a great opportunity for us to showcase that back to pinners. So Wayfair here, building a showcase of their top pinned products and promoting that through a number of different channels to their users. We see Nordstrom doing something very similar where pretty valuable real estate on their homepage they're devoting to our top pinned items on Pinterest. And this is something they're constantly updating and optimizing to give their users a sense of what's most popular. We see Martha Stewart doing something very similar. So on their homepage, promoting this just pinned, exposing people to content that is increasingly becoming more popular with their users. And a number of companies doing this. ModCloth here, they put together a gallery, Pin Love, their most pinned products. You go to that page, you'll see something similar here, their most pinned products. And all of our partners are telling us that these efforts are increasing the engagement on those items. And it makes sense, right? People feel some safety and security in knowing that, hey, these are items that others who share my interests are also engaging with. Epicurious promoting this in their emails. And they're telling us, as is Sony, that when they highlight the most pinned items in their emails, they're seeing engagement rates that are much higher than their typical engagement rates, their open rates and their engagement rates. Sony goes so far as to actually blog about it. They make a point of letting their customers know that, hey, we are here for you on Pinterest. Sephora, I thought what Jennifer mentioned around how do you teach people how to tweet, it was a great program. I don't have as cool of a video with Clinton talking about how to do it, but Sephora is doing something similar in teaching people how to pin. So I think this is something that all of us as marketers should understand, that a lot of our customers don't always understand how to properly use social media products, and so it can be a very valuable investment to help them onboard. And so in this case, Sephora has a whole page that talks about how to pin. And even though it's a pretty simple process, they realize that for some people that can be a bit intimidating. So they actually walk them through step by step how to pin while showcasing some of their most pinned products as well. Rich pins. So that second part of our mission, how do we help people actually take action on these items? And so we introduced rich pins 2 weeks ago, and the idea is that we are now automatically pulling data that for the most part already sits on your sites. This is using OEmbed data, in some cases it's using feeds, but it's providing an incredible amount of value to the user because now I can see this object that I've pinned, is it in stock, how much does it cost, where can I get it? And we're updating that information every 24 hours. So pins that you already have in your collection, if the price changes or the availability changes, that information changes too. So it makes it much more actionable now for the user. We've done this for products. We've done it for recipes. So now with recipes, you'll see a lot of really valuable information. Is it gluten-free? Is it part of the paleo diet? How many people does it serve? How long does it take to make it? What are the ingredients? Now, we don't give you the entire recipe because we want to make sure that the partner still benefits from that traffic. So you still have to go back to the partner site to see the step-by-step on how to make it. But you already see that, wow, I have these items in stock, or I have these ingredients in my house. I can actually make this dish. A lot of value there for the pinner. And we've also done it with movies. So you can see some information on movies. Who's in it? What's the Rotten Tomatoes score? Who's the director? And these are the first 3 types that we've released, but we're going to be releasing a lot more. We love that every pin on Pinterest has this kind of rich information to provide value back to the pinner, but also value back to the partner who provided it. Again, very lightweight effort here. There's not a lot of work that needs to be done. Most sites already have some form of this data attached to their products, largely for these types of reasons. And when you have these rich pins, you'll see it in your feed. You'll see little attribution links. You'll see these logos pop up in the pin, so you know that's a rich pin. And that pin has a bit more information. I can do a bit more with it. The second thing we did was, in addition to making the pins more valuable and useful, we made them more mobile. So we're all seeing increased usage and activity on our mobile applications. We wanted to make sure that people could pin from your mobile apps. So 2 weeks ago, we released the mobile SDK that allowed you to now incorporate the pin a button into your app so that people can pin right from the app. And more often than not, that pin will link back into the app itself. There might be some configuration on your end to make sure that works the way it should, but it deep links into your app. And so that's, a lot of people are looking at how do we drive more app traffic. Could be very helpful there. So rich pins and mobile pins, a couple ways to inspire more pinning. Now, once you get this flow going, once you start seeing more of this pinning happening, it's really important to then take a step and figure out what's working, what's not working. So we introduced an analytics product earlier this year that is built into Pinterest, so it has hooks into all the activity that's taking place on the platform. It measures pinning from your site, so this isn't so much around your profile on Pinterest. It's about what's taking place from your site. It allows you to see pins and repins, how many impressions are those generating for you, what kind of clicks are you getting from them, and more importantly, it helps you learn what pinners love most so that you can start producing more of that type of content. So really easy to get going with this. The important thing is you want to have your site verified. This creates a linkage between Pinterest and your site. It's a really easy process to do this. You can go to our business.pinterest.com site, and we'll walk you through step-by-step how to get your site verified. You'll know if you have this check mark next to it that you are. Once that's established, you'll have access to this analytics link in the drop-down menu. And it gives you access to a dashboard. Looks like this. Again, there's 4 things you'll see on this. You'll see pins and pinners. You'll see repins and repinners. You'll see impressions and reach. And you'll see clicks and visitors. These big blue numbers on the side here, that tells you the average daily number of these. So in this case, this property is getting 4,000 pins per day. And of course, you can zoom in, just like you could on like a Google Analytics product, and take a look at certain spikes or certain dates. So in this case, we see that for some reason on Monday, January 21st, there were an above average number of repins. When I dive in a bit here, I can see what drove that. I can click the most repin button at the top, and I can select the date. And see, these are the pins that drove traffic. In this case, a pretty delicious looking dessert. And I can drill into who pinned it. That person is probably the reason it got started in the first place. What board did they pin it into? Again, I can zoom in and see what are some other places where this pin was also pinned to. What does that tell me about where people see our product sitting? What kinds of products do they associate with it? I can take a look at people who pinned this also pin these other things too. And what does that tell me about how I can start packaging up some of my products in a better way? And so we're seeing a lot of really interesting uses of this. Some of our partners are exporting this, they're putting it in their own dashboards. And the important thing to remember here is that there's no right or wrong way. These analytics will tell you what works for you. So yesterday there was some article talking about here's the image of a perfect pin. It has these qualities. It looks like this. And I would be careful how much you take from that. We have some partners who tell us, you know what, a product on a white background works so much better than a product that's shown in context. Sony tells us this. But we have other partners who will tell us the exact opposite. You know what? When we actually show people using our product versus the product on a white background, that gets far more repins. And so you'll have to figure out what works for you. There is no silver bullet right now. Use analytics to figure out what's driving that popularity, and figure out different ways you can use these analytics. Nordstrom, again, they are using these analytics to inform how they organize merchandise in their store. And they're telling us that it is driving sales of all of those products at a higher rate than when those products were organized differently. So they have this real-time view into what kind of products do people think should be paired with one another. They've gone so far as actually build their own dashboards. They want their agents to always see what products are getting what kinds of pin volume. This is really cool. We don't have access to this. They went and built it themselves to give their agents and their stylists this kind of information so they can better inform their customers. So analytics, you can use that today. It's a free product. The last thing, we'll kind of wrap up here. Once you've gotten people to start pinning your products, once you've learned what do they like, how do they organize it, then you can start figuring out what your presence should look like. That should be the last thing you should focus on, frankly. Now, we have a number of partners who we feel have done a really good job in developing presence that are based on that kind of information and insight. We really like what Target's doing. Whole Foods does a really interesting job. So they're not only talking about products, they're talking about all the things that inspire them. They're from Austin, and so they have a whole board. It's just an homage to Austin. They talk about buildings and architecture that inspire them. I talked about Ben & Jerry's. So as cool as it is their products showing up in a board about weddings, they've invested in some fun things on their board to reflect their personality. They've got a flavor graveyard. They have a bit about their history, and they've done some cool things with 30 Rock. And so don't worry so much about setting up these presents up front. Get people to pin, see how they're organizing your products, and then start thinking about your presence. And so you're already doing a lot of work to optimize your properties for Google because people are searching and you want to make sure they can find your product when they're looking for your specific product. But there's also this whole discovery process too. There are kind of 2 ways in which people discover your products and services, right? Or encounter your products and services. They know they want it and they search for it, or they don't know they want it, but they discover it in ways that are kind of unexpected. And so just to kind of give you a couple of action items here if you're interested in. We would say go get a business account and verify your website. That'll allow you to start using analytics, because once you get people to start pinning, you're going to want to track what is working and what's not. And you can do all this right now at business.pinterest.com. We don't have a very big team, and so we get a lot of requests. Hey, can we get a meeting? Can we have you guys come in? And right now, we just don't have a lot of people who can do that, so we're trying to provide as many resources to you as possible. We're trying to provide as many of our best insights as we have into content that is available on our business site. That's what I have for you guys today. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.